But politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian?
And that scares me.
I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here.
I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard a better joke than this, but apparently Ben Shapiro now claims he's a liberal. Honestly, this is one of the funniest things I've heard in a long time. What really blows my mind is that he has the audacity to say that after everything he said throughout this entire interview. It genuinely amazes me how shameless he is and how shameless some of these guys can be. He spent the whole interview disagreeing with almost everything Neil deGrasse Tyson said, yet somehow he still has the nerve to call himself a liberal. Before we get into the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments, do you agree with Ben saying he's a liberal? I really hope I'm not the only one who finds this ridiculous. Alright, now let's get into the video.
It seems like the left is militating against the advent of science. One of those areas is the area of transgenderism. The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? So we live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
Yeah, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
That's what I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So, and I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. I mean, this is thought I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me, I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point. Meaning we express ourselves based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Neil deGrasse Tyson came into this conversation and immediately showed why he's one of the sharpest minds in any room. Because Ben opens up by saying the left is militating against the advent of science. And right away you can feel where this is going. He's trying to frame the entire conversation as if caring about how people identify themselves is somehow anti-science. But here's what's brilliant about how Neil handles it. He doesn't take the bait. He doesn't get emotional. He just calmly says this only matters because we segregate sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a damn what someone identifies with? And that right there is the question that nobody on that side ever wants to answer. Because the truth is, outside of sports, why do you care? How does someone else's identity affect your life in any way? It doesn't. And Neil made that crystal clear. Then he goes even further and says if we actually live in a free country as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. You have to understand how powerful that framing is. He took Ben's entire argument about science and biology and flipped it into a conversation about freedom. Because that's what this has always been about. It was never really about science. It was about whether certain people get to live freely or not. And what I love is when Ben tries to bring up the gender spectrum being taught in schools, Neil hits him with that wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. He's not even disagreeing with the science. He's saying this is a real observable thing in society. You can study it, you can categorize it however you want, but you cannot deny it exists. That's the difference between someone who actually respects evidence and someone who only uses science when it supports their predetermined conclusion.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that, although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
But where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish by asking yourself, is it science or is it not science? It's people in society.
But this is a perfect example of an area where suddenly it doesn't matter to say things that are just true. Like why is it bad or wrong to point out?
I have another way to approach this. I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. If you want to say it's only sociological, then it's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care who studies it. It's an interesting fact about society that's worth learning about. To fight someone and say, it's not biological, it's just your this, it's real and it's there.
Well,
because it's real because it manifests.
But it is real because it manifests, but the question of how to classify manifestation is a scientific question, meaning that, for example, there was a woman over at Brown University. Mm-hmm. She came out with a study that suggested that there was a phenomenon called rapid onset gender dysphoria, in which a member of a particular group would suffer from gender dysphoria, and this person's immediate peer group would suddenly have an onset of gender dysphoria. This paper was so controversial that Brown tried to pull it, and then was forced to reassign it later. You see this sort of treatment.
That's a different question. What you're asking now is, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically?
Right.
And is there some taboo? And Sam Harris speaks a lot about this.
Yes.
And I think the concern is, if you study some topic that's a hot button topic and you bring scientific methods and tools to it, we don't trust, I'm interpreting here, I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't that...
We don't trust our own ability to govern ourselves in the face of what could be some information relative to other kinds of information.
Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It means it's not a free society. It's not a society of free inquiry, which I think you need ultimately.
This is where it gets really interesting, because Ben starts pushing this idea that the argument being made is that trans women are identical to women. And you can see what he's doing. He's trying to create a gotcha moment. But Neil does something that I think is absolutely genius. Instead of falling into that trap, he just looks at him and says, "Where are you going with this? What are you trying to accomplish?" And the reason that question is so devastating is because it forces Ben to reveal his actual agenda. Because when you strip away all the biology talk and the science talk, what's the point? What legislation are you trying to justify? What rights are you trying to take away? That's the question Ben never wants to answer directly. And then Neil says something that honestly should be the standard for every single conversation like this. He says, "I just simply care what is objectively true, and science happens to be a pretty potent path to find out what is true." Here's what makes that so effective. He's not abandoning science. He's reclaiming it. He's saying, yes, let's follow the science, but let's follow all of it, not just the parts that confirm what you already believe. And here's a historical parallel worth knowing. Back in the 1800s, there was an entire field called phrenology, where scientists measured skull shapes to supposedly prove that certain races were inferior. It was presented as hard science at the time, and people used it to justify horrific policies. The science was eventually debunked, but the damage was already done. That's exactly what Neil is getting at when he reframes the question and asks, are there some topics that should not be studied scientifically? He's not saying don't study it. He's saying be careful about gets to weaponize the results.
But, yeah.
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
is, what is your motivation?
Why?
Right?
Why does that matter?
It matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. The history of that exercise
Then make a better argument.
Doesn't end well.
Well, but the history of which exercise? Bring out all the science and let's hash it out?
I'm saying if you bring out all the science and the politicians hash it out, the history of that exercise is a recipe for disaster if it involves discoveries that put people's freedom as defined in our Constitution at risk.
But now you're arguing for limitations on areas of particular study.
No, I'm arguing on we need a way to shield, we need a way to protect people's freedoms in the face of whatever gets discovered scientifically.
So I
agree.
I think that's what the Constitution is for, is to guard rights from.
But we're always fighting people who want rights are always fighting others who are saying they don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily challenge on the progressive left. It is a daily challenge, right? Here's an example. I forgot how I ended up getting this phone call. It was some magazine that serves the gay community. And they want, I don't remember why, because they wanted my opinion on, they wanted my opinion about whether being gay was biological or mental.
Right, there's that new study that came out, this vast study.
Or psychological.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And I said, I don't care which it is. Find out what it is, fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on legislations or laws. Because, for example, suppose it said it's purely biological, okay? Then you say, oh, that explains it. Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You say, well, now you're going to go to the reorientation camps or whatever those are called, where they realign you because they say it's psychological rather than biological. All of a sudden, people start behaving in ways in society that want to constrict the freedom of expression of who and what people are. And that is a danger. So maybe there needs to be a line in the sand. Let science do what it does, but politicians keep us free. Yet there's so many politicians that are doing the opposite of that.
So why aren't you a libertarian?
And that scares me.
I'm a libertarian. Come over here. Just
okay.
The line is right here. Just join me over here.
And this is the moment that makes the entire conversation worth watching, because Neil brings up something that perfectly exposes the entire conservative playbook on these issues. He says it matters because if you have political power, you could end up creating legislation that subtracts freedoms from people who previously were enjoying the same freedoms as you. Let that sink in for a second. He's not talking hypothetically. This is exactly what has been happening. People who were living their lives freely are now watching politicians debate whether they should be allowed to continue doing so. And the fact that Ben doesn't have a real answer to that tells you everything. But the absolute knockout moment is when Neil talks about getting that phone call from a magazine serving the gay community. They asked him whether being gay was biological or psychological, and his answer was perfect. He said, "I don't care which it is. Find out what it is fine. But the answer to that question should have no consequence on laws." And then he drops the hammer. He says, "Suppose it says it's purely psychological. What are you going to do now? You're going to go to the reorientation camps." That is the logical endpoint that people need to hear. Because this is not abstract philosophy. There were actual conversion therapy programs in the United States where people were subjected to psychological and sometimes physical methods to try to change who they were. That's not ancient history. Some of those programs were still operating well into the 2000s. So when Neil draws that line from a scientific finding to its potential misuse, he's speaking from reality, not theory. And the cherry on top is when Ben, after all of that, just says so, "Why aren't you a libertarian?" And you can hear it in his voice. He's not challenging Neil anymore. He's practically agreeing with him. That's what happens when you argue from freedom and logic instead of ideology. You eventually pull the other person closer to your position without them even realizing it. Neil didn't win this by being louder. He won by being clearer. And that's a lesson for everyone watching. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.